Welcome to this, the next set of Scriptural Reasoning sessions hosted by the Open University under the direction of Dr. Jessica Giles. I'm Michael Wakelin and I'll be acting as facilitator, but the real expertise will be provided by our Scriptural Reasoning practitioners, who will introduce themselves shortly. But before we begin, just a word about the practice of Scriptural Reasoning. It's a relatively recent addition to the crucial work of interfaith dialogue. 3 texts from the Hebrew Scriptures, the Qur'an and the New Testament are chosen on a specific theme. They are read out loud, recited in the original language where possible, relished by all participants, and then discussed in turn and in depth with representatives from the 3 faiths. The atmosphere is one of hospitality and respect. Differences are acknowledged and welcomed. There is no persuading of others or denying another's view. We learn to improve the quality of our disagreements. For our session today, we have selected texts on the subject of being created human, against the backdrop of the huge developments in artificial intelligence and people's fears of being taken over by robots. But before we get to the texts, I'm going to ask the panel to very briefly introduce themselves. If I can come to you first, Monowar.
Hello, I'm Imam Munawar Hussain, and I'm the Muslim tutor at Eton College.
Adam.
I'm Rabbi Adam Scoria-Moffat. I'm the Rabbi of St. Albans Masorti Synagogue.
And Catherine?
I'm Catherine Ogle, a Christian priest, and my ministry has been in parishes and cathedrals.
Alia.
I'm Alia Azam, the Interfaith Coordinator of the Al-Hui Foundation.
Trey.
I'm Trey Hall. I'm a Christian minister and the Director of Evangelism and Growth for the Methodist Church in Britain.
And finally, Miriam.
I'm Miriam Laurie, and I'm a rabbi at Kehillat Asherah in Boreham Wood.
Thank you all very much, and especially thank you for being here. So, to our text, shall we begin with the words from the Jewish scriptures found in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 to 28. Rabbi Miriam, will you read the Hebrew? Monowar, will you read the English translation? And while he's doing that, I'd like you all initially to pick out just one word or phrase that looks particularly interesting to you, and then Rabbi Adam will give a short introduction. So, Miriam, first of all.
Vayome Elokim na'asa Adam b'tzalmenu kidmutenu, v'yirdu bidgat hayam uva'of hashamayim, uva'behema, uva'chol ha'aretz, uva'chol ha'remes ha'romes al ha'aretz. Vayivra Elokim et Adam b'tzalmo, b'tzalem Elokim bara oto, zachar nukeva bara otam. Vayivarech otam Elokim, vayome lahem Elokim, Puru uruvu umilu et ha'aretz, v'chivshua uradu bidgat hayam, uva'of hashamayim, uva'chol chaya haromeset al ha'aretz.
Thank you very much. And Monowar, will you read the English translation while everyone selects their word or phrase?
And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on earth. And God created man in his image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, Be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on earth."
Thank you very much. And now, Rabbi Adam, would you give your short introduction to the text?
Short is a challenge, I think, with this text. For those who know its role in Judaism will know it's hugely significant for a variety of reasons. One is that it introduces to us the whole notion that human beings in particular are created in God's image. And we could spend hours on what that means, what that word means, what it even suggests to us that we in some way resemble God, whether that's physical or visual or something completely different. But it's also not just about the individual human being. It's not about what it means to be a human being. It's also about humanity as a whole. And at the moment, when we use words like Anthropocene to talk about our time, and we talk about anthropomorphism, another terrifyingly big word in theology, this is really the root of that whole conversation. Are humans the center of the universe? Are humans the most important species? If so, is it because of this? And what's our relationship like with the rest of the creatures that make up the natural world? And as a result, with God. We have God, we have ourselves, we have everything else that exists. And it doesn't really spell out to us as precisely as we might like what that nature looks like, what our nature looks like, and what our relationship with nature is meant to be. So it leaves us, as is typically the case with the Hebrew Bible, with more questions than answers. But I think they're the right questions to be asking.
Fabulous, thank you. And I want, just before we dive in deeply into the text, I want everyone just to say what their word or phrase was that they picked out to see if there's any synergies in the group. Miriam, what did you land on?
Him.
Him, okay, H-I-M, him.
Yeah.
Trey?
It's twice in the text, rule.
Rule, okay, Monowa.
Earth.
Earth, okay.
It's got to be image for me.
And Catherine?
Them.
Them, okay. And Alia?
It was rule for me as well.
All right, okay. You've stuck very much to the one-word rule. I actually picked out male and female. He created them, but which I think is interesting. So who wants to dive in then and examine their word? Why don't you head in first, Miriam?
Okay, well, I mean, this is a text that I think feminist readers of the Torah and the Bible, for Christian readers as well, have really pored over alongside a parallel text from Genesis 2, the next chapter. And in some ways, this is the better text for feminists because, as your phrase was, Michael, God created male and female at the same time. But it's interesting how the translator has put, let us make man in our image and him. And that's why I picked that out, because really the Hebrew Adam could also be translated as human.
Yeah.
But then that gets us into tricky water in chapter 2, where the same word, Adam, clearly is referring to a male.
Yeah, I mean, Adamah means of the earth, right? Mud creature, earth person.
Yes.
So there's a real humility there around being a creature. So it's which I find really interesting. This creature from the earth is then given, it sounds like, permission. This humble creature to rule or reign over the other creatures of the earth. So I find that really interesting, like those connections between humility made from the raw matter of the earth and then given responsibility to reign or rule or have dominion. I find that really a challenge in today's Anthropocene time around like, how are we different from the other creatures? Are we animals too? Animals, the non-human animals and us human animals. What is our relationship with other creatures and sentient beings? And how do we come to see ourselves as different from them, or different or better, different and yet still connected? So as I'm swimming in the sea, I don't just think about this text. I feel this text as the water moves around me and all the other animals. So that's that sense of connection to the other.
I have to say, I think translation doesn't do us any favors here. It's true of every text, but especially here. Because that word, chifshuha, right? You shall conquer it, how it might be translated. It can also mean you shall take care of it. You shall have responsibility for it. The nuances that can be implied by those words in English are so diverse.
Yeah.
But the world that we live in, one where we see humans destroying, conquering, demeaning the earth, we actually read it backwards. We read our experience backwards into what this says and assume it's telling us that we're meant to do what we're doing. But that's not actually a given.
I sense that the text goes beyond and above gender, that in fact it's talking about something holy and divine about the human being, men and women. And absolutely right in the sense that if we're created in God's image, then we have that freedom, autonomy, but it comes with huge responsibility too. And so I suppose, in a sense, questioning to what extent are we actually living out the image of God in ourselves? Because clearly we've been made or have been given the power to rule over other things, and to what extent are we being faithful to God in terms of living that power out and the control over the rest of creation.
Do you want to come in here, Catherine?
I think it's fascinating, this beautiful text, which means so much to us, and lots of us practically know it off by heart. Yet it's freighted with controversy, and actually I can imagine even greater controversy at the moment about gender and male and female and sexuality, and how exactly this text has been so used by people in power against people with less power. And certainly I responded to you, Miriam, with the language of him and they. They was my word, because where are women in this text? And I cannot believe that women are not also made in God's image. So we're not just an afterthought. So actually the translation I'm used to, I don't know if it's more accurate to the Hebrew.
Probably not, I'm afraid.
Is and God created humankind
That's
in
better.
his image.
That's better.
Men and
Definitely
female,
better.
he created them.
Yeah.
And I think there are some interesting things with the gender in here in the Hebrew. So somehow God has all that within God's self, male and female, and together men and women are in the image of God. But there's so much controversy, potential in this text now that we might not have been aware of 10 or 20 years ago. So it's extraordinarily freighted,
Yeah.
this short piece of scripture.
Alia, do you want to resonate with that?
Sure, yes. I think the Hebrew word for mercy is rahm,
Rachamim. yeah.
rahm, and so that has a sort of a feminine aspect of God providing for his people. And the attributes of God are ones that we could inculcate to be God-like. And I don't see a problem between the male and female in this verse, because they're both mentioned, male and female. He created them. And I think the soul aspect is treated equally. Yeah.
I was just thinking about made in the image and likeness, after our own likeness, which is quite a beautiful, a sort of high and glorious thing to be a human, made in the image of God, them, him, her, it,
Yes.
and just thinking about in this day and age where we do have responsibility to steward the earth, and what a wonder it is to be a human, and yet the mess that we get ourselves into and others into. And so how do we hold, the obvious evidence for the mess we've, perpetrated on the earth and other species with this really beautiful, glorious humanity? I mean, after the image and likeness of God, that's saying something, isn't it? It's not like God is totally other.
Okay, can I bring in Adam, because you picked
Yeah.
out the word image, didn't you?
Yeah.
So,
To me, I mean, there's so many things here, but that's the thing that I feel like that's at the crux of everything else. We talk about gender, we talk about a relationship with nature. What does it mean when it says in the very beginning we're made, or human beings are made in the image and likeness of God? Both those words in Hebrew are difficult words to render accurately. The key one is tselem, which is repeated many times, not just here in the book of Genesis. And it's so many things. It's like the best translation, I think, and Miriam, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like it's the after image. You see something and you close your eyes and you see the shape of it, but you don't actually see it. It's like something that resembles a real thing. It's a visual for sure. It's probably closest to like a ghost, right? It looks like the thing, but it's not the thing. And that's such a useful element here, because actually I do think the Torah is telling us we look like God in some ways. So what does that mean, right? That we look like God, that our physical body maybe has resemblance to some degree of divinity. It allows us to see ourselves differently, perhaps, but it doesn't mean we are God, right? It means we have a resemblance, the way that an after image, a shadow, a ghost looks like the thing it used to be, but it's not the thing. It's a bit of an illusion. So we fall into that illusion if we don't take this carefully, that we think ourselves to be God when only we're just the image.
Is there anything beyond the physical? Like, what's the nature of God beyond the physicality?
Yeah.
So what does it mean? Is it about will? Is it about intelligence? Is it about creativity? Is it about power?
Well, rabbis are annoying, and basically because there's two words here,
Yeah.
they have always insisted, the Jewish tradition insisted, they mean different things, because there's no such thing as synonyms in the eyes of the rabbis. If there's a word and another word, each of them describes a different aspect of the meaning. So tselem is understood to be actually largely a visual in some way, which is obviously treacherous territory for us. But demut, the second one, is more about character, right? About how one behaves, how one acts. And that's the one where the rabbis say what it means to say we're made in God's likeness, which is demut, is that we behave the way God behaves, where we imitate God's behavior and we act in a way, hopefully in the good ways that God acts in the world.
Can you be an annoying rabbi, Miriam, and respond to that? Do you agree?
Or not annoying one?
Oh, no.
Am I allowed to agree? Yeah, I think Adam put that really well. Yeah. I'm struggling with the idea of the body as like God having a body. I think, later in the medieval times, our philosophers said that God has no body, and, that would be a heresy. And yet I came across this really lovely idea recently. I just spoke about it on Pause for Thought, that Rabbi Hillel said, just as the kings of the Roman Empire were made into sculptures and statues, which were washed and adorned and taken great care of, so to us who are almost like statues, like you said, that after image of God, we've got to look after our own bodies because our body is an image of the Creator who created us in the image. So that's another aspect. We've got nature, we've got gender, we've also got the body and how we've got to respect ourselves.
Catherine, what was the word you picked out? Was it him?
They,
right,
yes,
yeah.
yes. And it was the theyness of God's image, really, that we're so used to seeing in Christianity depictions of God as an elderly man with a white beard. That sort of came into life at some point and captured the imagination. But I think it's so inadequate, obviously, trying to depict God in any way with a body, but that the image and likeness of God is a they rather than a him. And that just seems to just open up a great deal of creativity and imagination that's possible then about what is God's image and where do we see it. I'm also really interested about the first verse saying, let us make humankind in our image. That's how I'm used to seeing that translated. Let's make humankind in our image, suggesting the animals are not in the image of God in the same way. And so what is the difference then? It relates a little bit to what you were saying. What is the difference then between humanity and the animals? That means that God's image is in humanity in a different way to the rest of creation. And what is the difference then between us and the animal kingdom that makes that difference? And maybe that's what makes us particularly human as well, those differences, which I imagine has something to do with thought.
There are all kinds of wonderful stuff,
Yes.
theological
Yes.
intersections with theological studies and animal studies right
Yes.
now around
Oh.
consciousness, the
Yes.
capacity to mourn, the capacity
Yes.
to
Learn.
ritualize, learn.
Yeah.
And, that's not to say that there's this, it's the same, but there
No.
is perhaps less of a hard, bold line between non-human animal consciousness and human consciousness. I mean, I'm not a biologist, but when I cuddle up with my Labrador on the couch, I'm aware that I feel like she's more than just a clump of will and nature and tooth and claw. Something else is happening there.
I think some people would say their pets are closer to God than some humans.
Well, this is such a fascinating conversation because coming from an Islamic background, we have a verse from the Qur'an which says, "Laysa kamithlihi shay," that God is nothing like his creation. And so if God is nothing like his creation, how do we understand this verse? And for us, it's a metaphorical understanding. Maulana Rumi, the great Sufi poet, says that we're not a drop in the ocean, but we are the ocean in the drop. And so there is something greater about ourselves. And that greatness really is the manifestation of the divine names in the human being. Because we understand God through his divine names. And he, of course, is beyond gender. And so for us, it's a metaphorical understanding and understanding, what it means to actually be God-like, because that's the whole point about the journey to God is to try and manifest as many of those names of God and realize them in ourselves, his beauty, his generosity, kindness, justice, all of those things.
Alia, can I bring in your word at this stage? Because,
Yes.
what was the word you picked out?
Rule.
Ah, yeah.
So just to follow on for what Munawar was saying as well, we have what's called a Hadith Qudsi, where God speaks and the Prophet recites it's not in the Qur'an, but it says that man draws closer to me by doing supererogatory prayers until I love him. And when I love him, I become the hands with which he does, the tongue with which he speaks, and the eyes with which he sees, and the feet with which he walks. So it's about how close one can be to God by fulfilling what he's asked us to be. And it just shows the sovereign nature where you have God rules over us, and we have the right to rule over nature, but also thinking about being a steward as well.
Okay, rule is your word as well.
Rule is
wasn't it,
my word
Trey?
as well, yeah. I mean, I think Adam has pointed out in the Hebrew, it's a multi-layered verb. It could mean so many things: to have dominion over, power, be good stewards of, shepherd, tend, be good husbands of, all the things. So I think I'm personally interested in. I mean, this is the whole thing about, are we reading ourselves back onto the text? This is one of the difficulties of reading the text. Like, I would like it if rule meant, have wonderful, creative, generative, non-violent relationships with. Is that what it meant then?
Does it?
Can the
Adam,
text
Miriam?
mean more than it meant in the 3,000 years ago? That's a question.
It's a great question. I mean, we can't be too bound by trying to guess at what a text that was written 3,000 years ago means, because we don't have the context. We have a system of interpreting, and we have ideas of how do we take some meaning from it. But we also have to remain skeptical of our own perceptions. I mean, it's telling. I think we're at the risk of going off-piste a bit, but it's telling that, we don't write the Hebrew Bible with the vowels that you see written down here, with the dots and the marks and whatever. And as a result, that word that we're spending this time discussing could actually be many different words depending on what vowels are put in there. And it's something that we really value, that our tradition allows for a multifocal reading of the text. Rabbis play with this all the time when they go, actually, don't read it that way, read it this way, often in very radical and sometimes very fun ways. And so we do have a liberty to reread and to read ourselves into it, but we have to remain cognizant of the fact that we're doing that. I think the danger is when we forget that we're doing that and we think this is what it means and I'm right and everyone else is wrong. As long as we all acknowledge that actually it can mean many things, we can have a lot of fun with it.
Does this feel like a rabbinic conversation today?
Always. Absolutely.
Need a little bit more fight in there.
A little bit more fight
Yeah.
in the rabbinic or this one?
In this one.
Just when we're coming to the end of our time on this particular text, is there anything that anyone wants to add that hasn't been brought into the conversation so far? Monwai.
I suppose the reason I chose Earth is because Mother Earth serves us,
Yes.
Nourishes us, gives us sustenance, and whether we can learn from the earth, whether we can be earth-like in a sense, as humble and have as much humility as the earth does, because it's feeding us, and yet what we do to the earth is so awful.
I'm really glad you said that, because I was thinking about Trey's first point about Adam from the earth, and that it's all very well trying to master the earth, and we've done terrible things to it, forgetting that we are of the earth. What we do to the earth, we do to ourselves. So actually, although I think that the mastery has been really misused by humanity, actually the key is at the beginning, where we are of the earth. And maybe just realising the
We've
implications
abused
of
that power, haven't
Yeah.
we?
And any abuse will be at our own expense.
Yes.
Yeah. And we're seeing the manifestation of that now, aren't we? In our lives with the climate emergency and so on.
Okay, let's now turn to our reading from the Qur'an, which is from the Throngs, which is Surah 39, verse 6 to 7. And Imam, so glad you're here with us, and I'd love you to read the Arabic text, and then Trey will read the English translation, giving us all a chance to pick out a word or a phrase that we like the look of, and then Alia will do a short introduction. So thanks, Imam.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. خلقكم من نفس واحدة ثم جعل منها زوجها وأنزل لكم من الأنعام ثمانية أزواج يخلقكم في بطون أمهاتكم حلقا من بعد حلق في ظلمة ثلاث ذلكم الله ربكم له الملك لا إله إلا هو فعنا تصرفون إن تكفروا فإن الله غني عنكم ولا يرضى لعباده الكفر وإن تشكروا يرضه لكم ولا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى ثم إلى ربكم مرجعكم فينبئكم بما كنتم تعملون إنه عليم بذات الصدور.
Thank you so much. That's so beautiful. And Trey, if you do the English translation for us, and we'll pick out our words and phrases.
He created you all from a single being, from which he made its mate. He gave you 4 kinds of livestock in pairs. He creates you in your mother's wombs, in one stage after another, in threefold depths of darkness. Such is God, your Lord. He holds control. There is no God but him. How can you turn away? If you are ungrateful, remember God has no need of you, yet he is not pleased by ingratitude in his servants. If you are grateful, he is pleased to see it in you. No soul will bear another's burden. You will return to your Lord in the end, and he will inform you of what you have done. He knows well what is in the depths of your hearts.
Thank you. And Alia, your short introduction, please.
So the verse talks about the creation of human beings. Ordinary painters have to paint in a well-lit workplace, but the creator of mankind, the supreme artist, paints such fascinating paintings in such a strange, dark place. The threefold darkness is also an allusion to how the fetus is formed, wrapped in amniotic fluid, the uterus and the belly. The same human on the physical side is so insignificant, preserved in absolute darkness, but has the potential to reach a station that can design artificial intelligence. God punctuates the discussion with rhetorical questions such as, "How are you turned away?" An expression of amazement as to how one could possibly turn away from the worship of the one who is responsible for all the realities. So it is still God who bestows human beings with the capacity to fashion technology. But we can be a bit cautious. Earlier in the Qur'an, we look at the story of the golden calf in the absence of Moses, when he made a lowing sound, and that connected it to the idol having real power. And by comparison, we've created AI, which has the power to imitate human speech and reasoning, and there's a real risk that we stop using our God-given capabilities and rely on artificial means, much in the same way as the Israelites turned away from the one God and began to worship the golden calf in the absence of Moses.
Great, thanks very much. So I'm going to go around the table again, and you're going to pick up a word or a phrase that might have synergy with other people's thoughts as well. Miriam, what was yours?
Go for ungrateful.
Ungrateful, yeah. Trey?
No soul will bear another's burden.
And Monobar?
I have the Arabic word nafs, which is a single being. Nafs, soul.
Nafs, soul. Where is that?
So the first line, halakakum min nafsin.
Okay.
That
single being.
He created you from a single being, or from a single soul.
Okay. Adam?
The depths of your hearts.
Okay. And Catherine?
Yes, I've also chosen depth.
Right. And Alia?
The heart.
All right. Why don't we start with depths then, since two of you picked that out? What would you like to dive into in there?
I wasn't familiar with this text before, and I was really taken with how it takes us in a very short space from this depths of darkness, which I thought would be the womb within the body. It takes us from the womb where we begin to judgment at the end of our life. So in this short, we're sort of zoomed through all of that, our whole lives. Yeah, it just seemed beautifully, extraordinarily written, that journey of our life from the depths of darkness to our own depths, really, to the depths of God. Yeah, extraordinary.
Adam, did that mean the same to you?
Yeah, similar. I think I was reflecting on this in particular in light of the previous text we look at, and there's a sense from the beginning of this to the end that though we talk about depth, we're talking about like almost like nesting dolls, like one thing inside of the other, the threefold depths of darkness. Really interesting the way you explained it, Alia. But it's also with the starting about nafs, about a single being, is, every single human being is embedded within the previous one and the previous one and the previous one, and have this sense of depth that's not about going inwards to ourselves, rather about going kind of almost back in time and turning the clock back to where it began. Hard not to think about that sense of this unfolding of history through human action.
And what is this a crucial passage in the Muslim understanding?
Absolutely. It's crucial in so many different ways. I mean, in one sense, it's taking our all this rich diversity to one source. And in a sense that there is human diversity, but there is also unity as well. And often, sometimes, certainly in our world today, we seem to forget that there's more kind of trying to divide and separate rather than unify. And I use this verse actually to remind people that we're all part of the same human family. And so in that respect, but also the sense of gratitude. How grateful are we for what we have, whether it's good health, friendships, relationships, family, the water that we can just suddenly turn the tap and have water, whereas so much of our world and our fellow human beings don't have access to water or food and so on, but things that we just take for granted. And so part of faith actually is being grateful, having gratitude. And then ultimately that sense of, we discussed in the previous text about rule, that ultimately we're going to have to account for how we acted out in the world. And that there is that sense of being in front of God and saying, and having to answer for that control or power or position or wealth or whatever we've been given. How did we actually live that out?
I think that was what was really interesting to me. There are so many interesting things about this text. And as you said, Catherine, sort of this zoom from the origin to the end. What starts with this deep connectedness, we come from one soul, the nesting dolls, Adam, wonderful, not just in ourselves now, but back through time. But I was really interested in how the text seems to sort of move from that unity towards this hyper-individualism. So the word that came out for me was, no soul will bear another's burden, which felt to me as the first time reading this text like a little weird, given if we come from one place, why are we all judged hyper-individualistically? Why doesn't my soul bear some of your burden and vice versa? So I found that really, really interesting. And I'm sure there are nuances in the Arabic that I'm not getting, but I found that curious juxtaposition.
Miriam, you picked ungrateful.
Yeah, and Munawar opened up the idea of gratitude so beautifully. And I don't know if anyone's seen the cartoon of two twins in utero having a conversation and saying, do you believe in the mother? And do you believe in life after birth? And it really reminds me of that, this idea that we, and, again, in the threefolds, padding that we have around us, how easy it is as humans not to kind of take a step back and look at the big picture and think about how, miraculous it all is, how small we are in the scheme of things, and to see ourselves as the center of our own universe. It's that idea of ungratitude. And it also really opened up, in connection with the previous text, the idea of our connection to God. God has no need of you. Whereas in the previous text, there seemed to be quite a kind of needy connection, that God has made these mini-me's out there. Something to open up together.
That definitely stood out to me as well, the contrast that, like, the first text, God has assigned us a role. We've got a job to do. However we do it, well or poorly, we're agents of the divine. And as a result, God very much seems to need us, at least in the superficial meaning. But it really stresses here in the Arabic, and it says in this rhetorical question, right? If you're ungrateful, remember, God doesn't need you. And I wonder how that's meant to inspire gratitude. That if you feel ungrateful, you're meant to reflect on the fact that God doesn't need you. And then are you meant to think, well, I need God? Or is it meant to make you reflect on your actions? I'm not sure.
There's also a sense of agreeing to disagree, that there are certain theological or doctrinal questions that we, as people of faith, will have different perspectives on. But ultimately, that's fine. God will tell you at the end of the day where you differed on. And the idea of sort of not carrying anyone else's burdens is that sense of personal responsibility, that we really are responsible for our own personal action and must take personal responsibility. So, whatever different positions and so on that we might have on the earth, ultimately we will have to face the consequence of how we act. And so, from the very start, as kids, the sense that even if you waste water or food, all of that you're going to have to account for. And so do not be wasteful is another aspect to this. And it's really just saying, look, gratitude, but also just remember that all of the goodness and all the things that you enjoy, you're going to be held to account for it. And that means that your kind of action and work in the world is more responsible.
Okay. Trey, do you want to come in?
So the accountability you mentioned, first of all, I think difference is really interesting. So I'm always like, let's talk about the differences because I find them really fascinating, not just the sort of lowest common denominator. If we can all get together on love, but let's talk about the difference. I find it fascinating. It's what the judgment or the accountability is not just, according to the text, what we've done. Adam had mentioned, he knows well what is in the depth of your hearts. So does that that's not only refers to action, but also attitude, intent, quality. So it's like you could have done everything right, but if in your heart is hatred and vitriol and whatever, is that part of the judgment or the accountability?
You've really touched on something so crucial and significant in Islamic theology, which is that actions are by intention. That, for example, if I'm a very wealthy person, a philanthropist, and I'm giving lots of money out, now, what am I doing that for? And on the day of judgment, the philanthropist will say, God will ask him, what did you do with all the wealth I gave you? And he or she will say, I gave it to charity and all these good causes and so on. But it will not be accepted because he or she gave that money for the pleasure of other people to show off and to display their good actions or whatever. But ultimately, they weren't doing that for the pleasure of God. God knows what's in our hearts. Alia, would you like to add to that?
Yes, so you will be judged by your intentions. All your actions that you do will be regarded in that manner. And also the heart is something that people can relate to. And you could say someone has a heart of gold, for example. So gold is the only metal, the elixir of all the metals that's found native in nature. So we've got to try and purify our hearts and make sure that all our actions are with the right intentions. And then that's reflected. And you sort of remove the rust away from your heart and reflect godly attributes from looking at the previous verses. So that's something we should be wary of.
Basically, we can fool each other, but we can't fool God.
Amen.
Probably all agree on that. And
does that mean? No, I'm curious. Does that mean that you're judged on your thoughts? On if you intend something but don't do it? No. Is that?
That's a really good one, Adam. Because if you intend a good, you will get a reward for that, even though you might not have done that. But if you intend an evil and you don't do it, you don't get. You're
still in trouble.
You're not in trouble.
You're not in trouble.
No. So the point is that for a good intention, you get a reward, but for a bad intention, there is no accountability unless you do that act.
And then you actually do it, yeah.
And also, if you do a good action, you get a tenfold increase in reward. If you do one bad action, you only get that one sort of
definitely not equally weighted.
No.
Good counts for a lot more than bad in that regard.
That's right.
What's the difference between an intention and a thought pattern?
Well, niyyah, intention, is something that is central to our religious practice because it gets us to clarify why we're doing something. So before we actually do our formal prayer, we make an intention. Before we give a donation, charitable donation, we make an intention that this is solely for the pleasure of God. So niyyah, intention, is something that's really critical. And ultimately, it's about trying to create sincerity in all our actions, that everything that we do is to gain the pleasure of God.
So, Ali, you thoughtfully introduced the idea of artificial intelligence into your introduction. What does this text say about artificial intelligence?
So man has that capability to develop that artificial intelligence. But we've got to always be aware that it is God who's given us that grace to do it. And if you look at anything produced by AI, for example, you can easily detect sort of the lack of compassion in the wording. And we need to be wary of the more, what are you going to do with saving time and having more? So many people are losing their jobs at the moment because of AI. And, is that really the kind of world we want? I'm a teacher and I notice how so many of my students are doing AI to do their homework. Where's their critical thinking going? And if we're so dependent on technology, and we should really just be depending on what God has given us, intelligence.
The other thing that struck me about this verse was when it mentioned the heart. So this is the heart that really opens up the human being to the metaphysical. And that's unique to human beings. We can have artificial intelligence and so on, but it can never replace that spirit that God breathed into Adam and that we receive as well in the womb of our mother. And it's that spirit that makes us uniquely human and unique as well amongst all creation, that there's a receptacle within us to kind of experience that divine being.
Catherine wants to chip in.
Yes, I'm wondering how that relates. I think I maybe chose the wrong word, because I've actually become more and more fascinated with about bearing one another's burdens. No soul will bear another's burden. And I love it because it's really honest about the fact that we will have burdens in life, and it's our responsibility to carry our own. I think that's what I'm... But that equally, people's burdens will be different, will be their burden, formed from the womb throughout their life. What is that burden? I don't know whether machines have burdens, but often burdens are the thing we act out of inappropriately. But it might be the thing that fuels. It might be a burden, a longing for justice, or whatever the burden is. Maybe that's also about our human uniqueness, is our actual burden.
Well, the first thing we teach in leadership development is personal responsibility. That if you want to bring about change and realize your dreams, it comes from you. Take personal responsibility.
The question around artificial intelligence then is it created in the threefold depth of darkness? Can it be held accountable for the things that it does? Is it responsible? Can artificial intelligence show the leadership you're talking about, Manoir? And I think these are the questions. I mean, I would say no. But others might disagree with that.
And do you? Artificial intelligence can pretend to, I imagine. It can sort of copy that, but yeah.
I mean, to briefly take us back to the first text, I've been reflecting a lot separately about what AI means for us as Jews, because I think we've done what Genesis described God as doing largely, which is created something that resembles us but isn't us. And that distinction of what does it mean to be now in the role of creator and not created vis-a-vis something which is like our own shadow. It can actually fool many people and seem human. And the so-called Turing test is nearly a thing of the past. But is it the real thing? Is it like a statue of the God, or is it like, an image that occurs afterwards, or a ghost or something that once lived? Is it just us doing the same thing that God once did to us? And if so, where does that put us in that chain of being that we've been talking about throughout, from the beginning to the end, from the top to the bottom? We now are not just the end result, but we maybe are taking part in creating something else. It's kind of terrifying and exciting. I think there's it's easy to be very down on AI, and there's lots of reasons to, but it's also kind of exciting. What does it mean for us to be in that position? What power does that give us when it comes to what it means to be responsible for it?
So let's now turn to our Christian text, which is from the New Testament. We don't tend to read the passage in Greek, since most Christians don't really use Greek in our regular worship. So, Miriam, will you read the English translation for us so that we can select a word or a phrase we like the look of? And then Trey will give a short introduction to the passage.
1 Corinthians 15, 42 to 49. It is sown a physical body, it is raised a spiritual body. If there is a physical body, there is also a spiritual body. Thus it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. But it is not the spiritual that is first, but the physical and then the spiritual. The first man was from the earth, a man of dust. The second man is from heaven. As was the man of dust, so are those who are of the dust. And as is the man of heaven, so are those who are of heaven. Just as we have borne the image of the man of dust, we will also bear the image of the man of heaven.
Thank you, Miriam. Trey.
So this is from a letter that was written by a guy called Paul, who was a convert from Judaism to Christianity. He was a theologian and also a church planter. He started churches across the Roman Empire and Asia Minor. He started this church himself in Corinth and Greece, and he is writing to them with pastoral and theological advice. A question we ask these days a lot is, do I have a body or am I a body? And this was a question that was really a part of the early first century kind of conversation. There was a saying in Greek, soma sema, my body is a grave or my body is a tomb. This was sort of popular conventional wisdom, would have been in Corinth. And Paul is writing and sort of saying, well, actually, perhaps it's more complex than that the physical body is deeply, deeply connected to the spiritual body. They are a unity. They are held together somehow, not split, but held together. And he talks about these different representations or archetypes, the first Adam, the earth muddling that we've been talking about earlier in Genesis, which is our origin as humans, but also looking to the second Adam or the final Adam, who is known by Christians as Jesus, and is talking about our, as human beings, our destiny or our goal. So this whole sense of mud and spirit being held together, not just in these two figures, the first human and the last human, so to speak, but also for all of us, that this reality is all of us. Later, writing to his church, he says, "Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not die, but we shall be changed." And this is the essential mystery of those things being held together.
Thanks very much, Trey. So let me first glean your word or phrase that stuck out for you. Miriam.
Sown.
Sown. Monwai.
Physical body.
Physical. Adam.
Life-giving spirit.
Catherine.
Body.
Same as Monwai.
Yeah.
Alia.
Spiritual body.
And Trey.
Also.
Also. Okay. So shall we start off with physical body and body and dive a little bit into that? What struck you about that?
Well, I think it's, in a sense, talking about the great miracle of the body itself. It just struck me as that's, I'll probably have to think about that a bit more.
Well, let's
but that's...
let's
let
talk
me come
about it
back
around
to
more.
that, yeah.
Catherine, do you want to pick up?
So, as you might know, St. Paul is the most extraordinary, radical thinker. And this is really early Christian theology, the earliest theology, Christian theology in the Bible, before the Gospels were written. So St. Paul is working with really kind of plastic, fluid ideas, I always think. And I often think, Paul, I wish you'd had a second draft. It would have been, because this is quite difficult. And at other times, Paul seems quite negative about bodies and about the physicalness of being human. And at other times, absolutely welcoming it, just as sometimes he seems to not really know what to do with women, but at other times is incredibly radical, saying there are no barriers between any of us. We're all one in Christ. So for me, I've always got a complicated relationship with Pauline writings, but here is so genuinely moving. His talk about physical bodies and spiritual bodies and the what that means in humanity made in God's image. So well done, Paul. But at other times he's really odd about bodies, isn't he?
He is the other Christian in the room, Trey.
Well, I for the next. And I'm like, I know someone like that myself, so I sort of see him as someone who is, we say in the church, like undergoing the good news, undergoing the gospel. He's in transition. He's showing us, he's testifying to his change as he writes all these different letters in real places. The whole thing about the body, physical and spiritual, we were talking earlier about God having a body, which is a challenge theologically in some religions. But for Christians, obviously, God does have a body, or at least some part of God or some way of talking about God showing up in the physical body of Jesus, So it's interesting that Christians have sometimes been really disembodied when we have part of the centrality of our faith is around a human body.
Do you think Paul should have had a second draft?
Well, I couldn't say. I like this. I like this text quite a bit.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question of it?
Of course.
I genuinely don't know what a spiritual body is. It seems like an oxymoron. The body is the body and spiritual is not the body. So what's a spiritual body?
Well, as with rabbinic texts, there's lots of thought about this, but generally refers to the body after the resurrection.
Okay.
So there is the earthly body, mortal, and then the body post-death raised into
so it's
new
chronological,
life.
now and later.
Now and later.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're not coexisting at the same time. You don't have a physical body and a spiritual body simultaneously? Or you do?
Well, time is also a weird thing, isn't it? Because this thing that happened, the resurrection, sort of set into reality metaphysically, Christians would say, something that is timeless. So in some sense, even now, I am a human being with what's to come in me already because of what's happened in Jesus Christ. So it's quite mystical, which is one of the reasons I like Paul. It's not only chronological, like one day I will resurrect in the spiritual body, though I believe I will, but that is also somehow now present in me.
Triple darkness.
Triple darkness, triple light all together.
It's a brilliant question. And I think it's also that Paul says this is our future, but we're to try to live it now. So what will we be like in heaven? We're not sure, but somehow bodies are also part of heaven. Yeah. It's all impossible, but we have glimpses of it.
So there is the Feast of the Ascension, where Jesus's body, resurrected body, went to heaven. So sort of what you're saying, Catherine, like now there is materiality in the heavenly realm. There is a body there. So Christians would say, we believe in the resurrection of the dead as part of one of our creeds. And that's not just the resurrection of Jesus, but we believe somehow the resurrection of all of our bodies.
Okay, I want to come to Monovar because you picked up on physical, didn't you?
Yeah,
talking
physical.
about this.
I mean, there's something about the physical body. It really is a living miracle. And I suppose it relates to our sense of identity. Are we the same in a spiritual body as we were in the physical body? And to what extent does a physical define us? And to what extent does the spiritual define us, if we're both on separate planes? So for me, it's more the physical body, and without the physical, you cannot have the spiritual.
And Manoa, that's...
an all-in-one kind of thing.
That's why the word that jumped out for me was sown. It was the idea that when we're in a body, we're almost like a seed in the ground that's growing what's going to come afterwards. And I love that idea. I'd always kind of been schooled in the dualistic idea of the body is in the soul and the soul is the casement in the house. And I hadn't gone as far as the grave, but, souls in bodies. But this is really different. It's very intertwined. And it's saying that actually our soul is really impacted by its time in the soil of the body or, in the seed that's growing. And we grow as souls through the bodies we're in. I'm really loving this. And I don't know about the rest of Paul, so I've got no...
Yeah, you don't have baggage.
I don't have baggage.
You're not on the therapist's couch because of that.
Do you want to bring in your life-giving spirit thought here, Adam?
Yeah, there's so many incredible phrases. I mean, I guess I suspect it was helpful, your introduction, Trey, because I wasn't actually sure at first reading whether I was meant to read the last Adam as a reference to Jesus. As a non-reader of the New Testament, I'm never really sure what's a reference and what isn't. But it's interesting that to the point we made on the previous text from the Qur'an, that Jesus goes from being a created thing, a man of dust, to being a creator thing, right? A man of heaven, right? And a life-giving spirit. Something that was created becomes something that does creating. And it's that interesting switch about what it means to be human. I know there's been literally wars fought in the Christian church, right, about is Jesus human, is Jesus divine, is it both, is it neither, is it somewhere in between? And I don't pretend to know or understand the distinctions, but it's clearly the crux of this whole issue about being human is how much are we a thing of dust and dirt and earth, and how much are we a thing of God and spirit and heaven? And, where's the balance in that?
Do you want to bring your thought into the mix, Alia?
Yes, so I chose the spiritual body as it's completely infused in the physical body. And, one can't live with, well, the spiritual body can live without the physical body because it will then go on into the afterlife and it's almost immortal in a way. But in this phase, it has to have that physical body, which is interesting. And the fact you chose sown, I thought that also emphasizes darkness and how a seed grows, for example. You've also got that slow development. Yeah.
And Trey, I noticed that you picked up on also, which is
also, yes, I just
bizarre.
love also the conjoining born of the image of the man of dust and also bearing the image of the man of heaven at the same time. It's not when one is more, the other is less. So when you're more born of the image of man of the image of dust, then you're less spiritual. They are at the same time 100%, which is this mystery, right? And it is a mystery. What does that mean? It's not scientific. Can you put 2 pounds of coffee into the same coffee can? No, but you can in this kind of thing. So also together at the same time, I think it's really interesting. Jesus, we believe, was born of the Virgin Mary. This is the old language, right? So born to use the language from the Qur'an, in the threefold darkness, surrounded by the amniotic fluid of Mary. So in a human, he was born of Mary, human, but also we believe the Spirit was with him, the Holy Spirit, and it made me think of the other text in Genesis 2, I guess, where the mud creature is formed. And then God breathes into the mud creature God's breath. So even from the beginning, we would say there is spirit and mud together. So just to sort of, again, more of the mystery of those things. So it's not only like at the beginning, just mud, and at the end, just spirit. From the beginning, Christians would say spirit and mud together.
I wonder if this, in terms of our thinking about artificial intelligence, where this really is the division between humanity and machine, because machine can't have spirit in it. It's nuts and bolts and chips. And
I guess it depends on what you mean by spirit,
Maybe the question is, at what point does a machine have spirit in it? If that's the case, is there a moment where we go, this is now different than it was before? Can we breathe life into it the way that life was breathed into us? I'm not suggesting we can, but I think it's a valid question considering the way in which things are developing.
I think the fear is that AI will begin to, if it doesn't already, have consciousness. And once that happens, then, is that the spirit?
I heard a lecture on this last week. I am not a scientist, but I heard a lecture that Elliot also heard around right now, basically, and maybe you know more about it, Adam, having reflected on it.
Probably not.
It's basically a series of algorithms that sucks in all the information and sort of puts out like nice nuggets of information. So it's not really, there's no sense of consciousness at all. And the guy who was talking about
ultimately reinforce the distinction between a living thing which has the Spirit of God in it and something which happens to look like a living thing. And there's probably some wisdom in that for us, that we're getting confused maybe between things that resemble a living thing, things that resemble us. But maybe, like you said, Trey, maybe they're fundamentally just a bunch of algorithms that, do a good job of imitating us, the way that we might do a good job of imitating the divine if we listen to the instructions given.
But maybe also the text holds something of an answer for us, because the reason St. Paul is writing to the Corinthians, well, there'll be many reasons, but one of them is he's heard that they're behaving badly.
Interesting.
So they've already not being the kind of Christians he thinks that they ought to, they're not behaving in the way. So
this is rebuke.
There's always rebuke in St. Paul, but again, it's what you said. It's actually reassuring that the church has never got it right and is in constant need of being recreated, remade, reborn, as are we all. So what I wanted to say really was that as human beings, the spiritual aspect of ourselves, which enables us to connect with holiness, God, whatever language we use, can also recreate us. And as human beings, we are able to be recreated if we're listening, if we're willing, if we're asking God, if we're seeking to be obedient to God. So when we go wrong, we can be put right again. We can be remade always. That's always open to us as human beings. That's very different to a programmed